I'm just going to play this slideshow. It's not directly related to what I'm talking about, but it is pictures of my school and our students, and I'll get into all that in a minute, but wanted to take a moment and introduce myself as well. As Kara mentioned, I am a former debater. I debated for almost 2 years in high school at Chattahoochee. My senior year was the first year that the school traveled to any sort of national competition, so it was a very young program then. And then I went here at Emory for college and debated some of my first 3 years. I was a computer science major here at Emory. But during college, after my sophomore year of college, I had a summer job working in a restaurant, waiting tables, and that was how I started working in food service. And so as college continued for me, I was still doing my work and going to school and all of that, but it was less of a priority for me, and restaurant work became my life. And so from when I was still in college through just a couple years ago, I worked in various restaurants in Atlanta. I spent about 15, 16 years with a group that's called Fifth Group Restaurants. They have a lot of different fairly relatively high-end restaurants around town. They're not super expensive, all of them, but everything is made from scratch in the kitchen. I worked in 5 of those different restaurants over that period of time. I started out waiting tables and tending bar, and then was working at a restaurant called La Tavla, which is in, if you're from Atlanta, it's in the Virginia Highlands, and had a good relationship with the chef there, and thought it's something that I wanted to be involved in the cooking side. And so I started working there. I never went to culinary school. I had for many years my eye on going to culinary school. Those are usually 2-year programs. Most of the time they're instead of college, but a lot of times people go to college and then also will go to culinary school. And it was something that I had planned to do for a long time, but then eventually decided I didn't want to do it for a variety of reasons. If you're curious about it and want to know later on, I'd be happy to talk about that. But I started just working a very basic prep shift. I was just learning how to use a knife and how to do that on a large scale, and I was prepping our brunch service. So I was just doing the same thing every single Saturday morning, getting the restaurant ready in a lot of different ways. And that eventually I became a cook at the same restaurant that I'd been waiting tables at, and that was my full-time job there. I worked a number of stations there. I went to another restaurant. I worked a couple years there, and then I went to a restaurant in Midtown in 2006. It's called Echo. You may or may not have heard of it. It's a European restaurant, and we did everything from scratch there. I opened that restaurant as sous chef, which is like an under chef. Most restaurants will have an executive chef who is at the top, and then have one or more sous chefs who are their assistants who are right below. And that's how I started there. Worked there for a couple years in that position, and then was made chef de cuisine, which meant that I was basically running that kitchen with regards to staffing and a lot of the menu creation and sourcing ingredients, buying all of the products that we were serving, etc. But I wasn't kind of the top person. And then my most recent restaurant job was at a restaurant called Lure, which is a seafood restaurant in Midtown Atlanta. It opened in 2012, and I was the executive chef that opened that restaurant. And I worked there for when the restaurant was open, about 2 years. I worked about 3 years on that project in total. All right, so that takes me to about 2014, and was still very, very happy in the restaurant world, still very engaged in it. And this was what I had, when I was a younger person, starting out in restaurants, I kind of dreamed of. It had been what I'd been spending all of my career working towards, which was being at the helm of a restaurant and learning all the different ways and important aspects of the food and beverage industry, which is a very interesting and rewarding career path, and I still think it's really wonderful work. But for me, this kind of came, the job that I do now at the school just kind of found me by chance. The school is in Grant Park, which is a neighborhood in Atlanta, downtown, just east of downtown Atlanta, and that's where I live. And so I lived at the time right across the street from this elementary school, who was looking for a chef at the time, and just a friend put me in touch with some of the administration at the school. And while initially I was like, that's a nice idea, but it's not something I'm interested in. I am, the chef at this restaurant. People are spending, $50, $60 a person on their seafood dinner, and it's kind of where I've been working towards. But on the other hand, I have children. I have an 8-year-old, and I have or almost 8-year-old and almost 3-year-old. And at the time, 3-year-old wasn't yet born, and I was thinking that time with them, time with my family, and balance of life would be something that would be more appealing to me. And this school is a charter school, and they were looking to start a farm-to-school program at the school to both do all of the food service for the school, which I'll talk in much greater depth about that in just a moment, but also to create a program there that would focus on farm-to-school issues, on sourcing from the Atlanta community, and making food from scratch, involving students in the process, etc. And that all seemed appealing to me. I liked the idea of being able to start something from scratch there, and then obviously the quality of life was a real benefit. And so that's a move that I made. I started working there in the 2014-2015 school year. And so I've just finished my 3rd year in school nutrition at this school. That's kind of my history to how I'm here speaking to you. And it wasn't ever my plan to be in school nutrition, but I found that I really, really like the work. Before I go into the specifics of the school nutrition part, just a couple notes about my school, Atlanta Neighborhood Charter School. It is part of Atlanta Public Schools. We're a public school, but we're a charter school. So that means that there's a lot of leeway at our school in terms of how curriculum is structured, in terms of how the school day is structured, certain other things like the food program. All of the rest of Atlanta Public Schools food comes from their contracted vendor, which is Sodexo. They're a big, multinational food corporation, and they do all of the food in all of the Atlanta Public Schools, with the exception of some of the charter schools. In my school, we're employees of my school, and I have a small staff. It's 6 of us, including myself, and we make food from scratch at our school for our students and our staff every single day. We're, as I mentioned, in Grant Park and Ormwood Park. The school is kindergarten through 8th grade. We have an elementary campus in Grant Park, and then there's an adjacent neighborhood called Ormwood Park, which is where our middle school is, and which is where my kitchen is as well. So this is part of Atlanta Public Schools. These 2 neighborhoods are relative to most of the rest of in-town Atlanta on the more affluent side, and that shows in our free and reduced participation. Free and reduced participation is how they determine how wealthy or poorly funded a school is and what their overall poverty level is in their school. It's all based on their free and reduced numbers, which is students eligible for either free or reduced lunch. Which I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute too. Just for comparison, just so you can kind of understand what is going on with my program at my school, the most recent figures that I could find for Georgia were 57% of students in Georgia are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Compare that to 48% nationally. My school, just this past school year, we were 15% free and reduced eligible. So that's fairly well off public school, all things considered. All right. Again, like I mentioned, we're K through 8. We've got 2 campuses, and we've got about 650 students total between the 2 schools, so it's a fairly small school overall. Of those 650, we feed between 300 and 500 of those students every single day. Plus, a lot of the faculty and staff will eat our food as well. Depends on what the menu that we're offering that day is. My job as chef and nutrition director, there's 2 main parts of that, but there's a lot of different parts in general, or a lot more to speak of as far as what I do beyond just the nutrition director stuff and the chef stuff. But those are the main 2 parts of my job. The chef side of it is to write all of the menus for what we serve, to create a lot of recipes. We're cooking almost everything that we can at my school from scratch for our students. That's breakfast and lunch every single day at both schools. We try and focus a lot of our buying on the Atlanta area and Georgia grown, and even greater than that, Southeast region. And so a lot of our produce comes from local vendors. Over the course of a school year, we probably support at least 30 different Atlanta food organizations, from a variety of small farmers to distributors that focus on minority-owned farms, like Common Market is a distributor that we use. They represent primarily minority-owned farms in West Georgia. So we try and make a conscious choice about what we purchase to serve in our school in terms of produce, also in terms of meats. Almost all of the proteins that we serve are naturally raised or sustainably raised. When possible, they're raised in Georgia or the Southeast. Like, for instance, we don't use a lot of ground beef or beef at all, but when we do, it comes from this guy Tommy at Gum Creek Farms, and he's a very small farmer, and that's all I buy from him, but it's a nice quality grass-fed beef, and that's what we use at our school. So that's part of the chef job, is to source those ingredients, to write menus that are going to be using those local ingredients, but also focused on, I don't know, hopefully we're creating a group of really healthy eaters who've got students who are related to their food, understand where their food comes from, appreciate a wide variety of food, and eat a lot of fruits and vegetables as well. So we try and serve almost all fresh produce, very little frozen and very little canned produce. We try and change things seasonally, and so we represent what's in season right now, whatever the fruits are. We serve watermelon right at the very end of the school year and right at the very beginning of the school year, but we don't serve it in January because all that stuff is coming from the other side of the world, and it's also not as good as when you're eating it right now, for instance. So we also try and represent a lot of other cuisines that students may or may not have familiarity with. So we'll serve things that are very familiar to all of us, nachos and tacos, those sorts of things. But then also dishes from further afield. A lot of times this ties in with what students are studying in their classes. Some examples of this: we did a menu of Ethiopian food when our 7th grade students were studying sub-Saharan Africa. We've done foods that represented what we think folks ate around the time of the Civil War to coincide with 8th grade studies about Georgia history. And so we try and do a lot of these kinds of special menus that tie in with what students are studying, both to just broaden what we're doing at the school, but also to hopefully, kind of tie in and illuminate some of what their regular classwork is about. That's the chef side of things. The nutrition director side of things is a good bit drier. It's not my favorite part of my job, but it's essential. I'm the person who's primarily responsible for dealing with the State Department of Education, which is pretty much where almost all of my contact with government employees comes. That's to show that our school is making all of these meals in compliance with the guidelines set out in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act and other federal regulation as well. My department, we handle the free and reduced applications, and generally, because we're a small school, I'm the person doing almost all of that work. That's each and every school year, determining eligibility for students, whether they're available to eat that sort of those reduced price meals, and how to document that. But it also means a wide variety of other things too. Simple facilities things like making sure that we pass our health inspection and have like our hoods inspected, and just basic kitchen maintenance things that would be in any kitchen as well. These are still things that I have to deal with, even though we're in a school. It's still a running kitchen, so there's a lot of that aspect of it as well. So nice things about my school, again, it's a charter school, and so that means that there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how we're going to do most everything. For instance, this school nutrition program, again, I didn't go to graduate school for school nutrition. A lot of folks have. There was no framework or structure or program in place at all when I took this over. Before I was at the school, our school used a caterer. This is what a lot of charter schools will do. They'll just contract out the work of feeding the students and staff to an outside company. This company was not doing a very good job at my school. The kitchen was really gross and dirty when I started working there, so I could tell that they weren't taking a lot of pride in their workspace and their effort. But also, for instance, students who have severe food allergies or food needs at our school, those were not being met. Teachers were having to kind of scramble and make do and run to the grocery store themselves to make sure that some of our students who have special dietary needs were taken care of. And then also the state, when they were investigating whether or not our school was compliant with the federal regulation, these caterers were not doing a good job. So that was part of why I was hired as well, was to start a program that would be in good stead with the state and do things the right way. But that was me learning what the right way, what even the way was, as I was doing it that first school year. And so because it's a charter school, I had the flexibility to be able to try things, to make a transition from cooking food that I was familiar with and producing at the restaurants that I worked at, and kind of changing my focus and style and making it something that students, even as young as kindergarten, are going to find appealing and actually want to eat. And that took a good bit of my whole first year, I would say, was a learning process as far as that goes. There were dishes that I thought were very, very simple, dead simple, that I started with that students were just not interested in eating. If there was any green on something, we did like a heirloom tomato and watermelon salad with basil in my first year. It was something that was a very easy sell at the restaurants I'd worked at, but kindergarten and first graders looking at that dish were like, you rest up by watermelon, I'm not interested, and nobody would try it. So that was a learning process for me. but I had that kind of flexibility at the charter school to work that out. I also, the school that I happen to be at, I feel like has a really supportive, interesting faculty, staff, parents, school board, all of these things. It's a really vibrant school. It's been around for about 15 years, so it's well established. And it's got a really good community working in it, a very progressive group of folks. And then there's a constructivist pedagogy at the school, which I'm not, again, an educator by training, so this is my understanding of what that means. But at our school, there's less of a focus on the standardized testing, which our students still have to do, much as I'm sure you all have to do in your schools, or many of you have to do in your schools. But that's not the main focus of what the instruction is about. There are no grades at our school, just whether you are at the expectations that we would have for you to have at this grade level. Most of the student work is done in a hands-on way, and where projects illuminate whatever it is the students are studying in their classes, rather than there being lecture and there's no textbooks, for instance. It's almost all built in and folded into projects that students do, a lot of times in group work. And the students are really not self-taught by any means. We have really experienced instructors at our school, but the students are as much about guiding their learning whenever possible, and the teachers are viewed as almost more like mentors or coaches in many circumstances. What that means for me is that I'm able to, a lot of the pictures you're seeing in this slideshow are students that I have had in my, my class. So in addition to my nutrition director work and the chef work of feeding the school, we also teach a class at at our middle school. They call it the academic growth period. It's just a half an hour every day. I usually have 15 to 18 students at a time. We do 3 terms over the course of the year, and we do a mixture of just basic culinary fluency and kitchen fluency. We have a class set of 8-inch chef's knives and 3-inch paring knives, for instance, and each student learns how to use those knives, how to take care of them, how to clean them, how to not cut each other when we're all in a room working together, which is a challenge, but we've only used like 3 Band-Aids over the course of the last 2 years, which I'm happy about. In addition to basic culinary skills like that, we also have a focus each term. So we've done, for instance, traditional Mexican cuisine, specifically focusing on tacos. And so we served a meal at our schools that was lamb barbacoa. We bought whole lamb shoulder from White Oak Pastures, which is done in Bluffton, a very nice, sustainable farm. We had the students make rubs for the lamb, and they rubbed it. It got roasted overnight. They pulled all the meat. We made 2 different flavors of salsa. We made agua fresca. We made a lot of different ingredients for this one meal that was served, and the students actually served that meal to the rest of the student body. And so they were able to show off their work. They were able to see a project through from planning the menu all the way through to execution, et cetera. And so we've done courses that focus on the traditional Mexican cuisine. We've done baking. We've done preservation. We've done farm to table in our school garden, et cetera. So I really appreciate the opportunity that I have to work with students and to develop these courses because it's fascinating, and it's really, really fun to see students get engaged and to involve students in our process at the school. I mentioned briefly that sometimes we'll tie menus into coursework, like the Ethiopian menu or the Civil War menu, or every month for Black History Month we'll feature a number of special menus that are tied into that. This last year we did one. There's a famous chef, a woman named Edna Lewis, who wrote some really important cookbooks from reminiscing on her childhood in rural Virginia. These were published like in the 70s and 80s, but she was a really influential person in the American food movement and in Atlanta as well. She was kind of a mentor to a chef that one of my staff used to work for over in Decatur, named Watershed, and we did a menu of her food, very, very simple food, kind of different from what we'd been doing. That was this year for Black History Month, and I appreciate having that kind of flexibility. We even work with the younger grades, students in 3rd through 5th grade, spend some time in our kitchen washing dishes at the end of their lunch period as a way to serve the rest of their school and to be more connected with everything that happens in our program. We do a little bit of work educating with grade levels as well. When the younger grades are studying, like kindergarten, 1st grade, and they're talking about parts of plants, we're in there doing a couple different lessons with them on edible plants and how it demonstrates all the different concepts that they've just been learning in their classroom. So Although I kind of found myself there not on purpose, and I found myself there because it was going to be a good fit for me, I felt, in my life on a personal level. I'm really enjoying this school. I feel that it's a really unique school that I'm really happy to be a part of, and I've both felt supported in my work there and feel as if my work is also helping our students in a lot of ways, beyond just the tangible, getting them something that they like to eat and having them eat healthy foods, also having them understand, hopefully on some level, where that food is coming from, why we're making the choices we're making in our program, and how that affects their lives and hopefully their future as eaters. So that's kind of my work in a nutshell. If you've got specific questions about any of this, please feel free a little bit later on. I'm happy to talk about any aspect of it. You've seen a little bit of the food. Obviously, you've seen a lot of different pictures of student work in our schools. There's also some pretty fantastic chalkboards. Our teacher at the middle school is excellent, and every day he comes and he gives himself 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes to just whip out these chalk boards that are our menu for that day, and sometimes in memoriam of somebody famous that passed away recently, he likes to incorporate those. So I don't know, they're pretty interesting. I put a number of those on there, but that's what those are. I wanted to speak a little bit more thoroughly about my interaction with the local, state, and federal bureaucracies and regulatory agencies in my work, because I think that's probably most relevant for you and how you're going to construct debate arguments, what you may have questions about, and just try and give you an idea about how the system works as it's in place right now. Again, I'm only 3 years into this, so you may have questions that I don't know the answer to, and I'm sorry if that happens, but I'll try and give you as much of an understanding of the system as I can. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we are a charter school, and so I still have to comply with all of the regulation that's laid out that any other public school would have to comply with, for the most part. There are a couple small exceptions which I'll try and touch on. But as such, again, I'm doing my work and cooking this food, but also handling the regulatory side for a very small school of only 650 students. As far as the state is concerned, even though we're part of Atlanta Public Schools, we're our own SFA, or School Food Authority, and so I talk to the State Department of Education in the same way that the nutrition director for all of Atlanta Public Schools, or for Fulton County Schools, or Gwinnett County Schools, or whatever, talks to the state. So I see some of that level, but I also am not feeding hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of students like some of these larger programs are. And so some of the changes that you're proposing in your affirmative are things that we may already be doing, but it's a lot easier to make a small change at one school than it would be to in a larger thing. So I can't necessarily speak to how some of these aspects work in a larger school system, but I'll do my best. So again, there's a lot of different levels of government bureaucracy and agencies, as y'all are, I'm sure, aware. And I had to deal with a lot of different levels of those in my work. On the local level, this is City of Atlanta and Fulton County. That's fairly basic stuff, and everything that I have to deal with them for is anything, for the most part, that I would have to deal with, that I've had to deal with in my career in other restaurants. It's basically having a facility. So we get health inspected. We get health inspected more frequently than other places do. Schools are required to be health inspected twice every school year. When I was working in restaurants before, it's once every calendar year. And also, there was one time where we didn't get health inspected for 2.5 years just because, I don't know, they never came by. We were doing good work. We always got hundreds in the restaurants that I worked at. But we weren't like itching to call them and be like, hey, you haven't shown up, please come health inspect us either. So just so happened it didn't happen for like 2 years at this one restaurant I worked at. But in schools it happens twice at each school year. We also had to deal with things like wastewater and the fire marshal and other things like that, just to make sure that the building is being maintained in a way that's safe. But none of that has to deal with the state or the regulation. The City of Atlanta, or Atlanta Public Schools, I have to deal with a little bit. Again, we're a charter school. Our charter is granted through Atlanta Public Schools. We have to resubmit an application for that charter for it to remain valid every few years. And I'm not involved with that process at all. That's something that our board of directors and our executive director handle with Atlanta Public Schools. I do have to deal with them a little bit because of free and reduced applications. Each school year, the way that free and reduced works is that there are income guidelines that are set forth each and every school year. And it's a very simple matrix, basically based on a certain income level and household size. That's everybody in the household. Parents, other children, if you've got other family members who are living with you or whatever, those are just all counted as the same. So for a family of 4, if you have an income of this amount or below, you may have free meals, or there's a slightly higher level that means reduced meals, and then everyone else is just a full-pay student. And those applications have to be submitted every single school year. So it's a lot of work at the beginning of the school year to make sure that you've got all that processed and that's happening right. The other way that people can qualify for free and reduced meals is if they're in families that are already receiving assistance. This is SNAP and TANF benefits. SNAP is, I can't even remember these. TANF is temporary assistance for needy families, and SNAP, I cannot remember what that means.
Supplementary Nutritionary Assistance Program.
My man. So that's basically food stamps. And so if your family is already receiving these benefits, then the students in those families automatically receive free lunches each and every school year. City of Atlanta, I mentioned before that the free and reduced numbers that any given school has is how they determine the poverty level or the income level of any given school. That's the only way that they do it. And so it's important information for everybody involved. A lot of times I have to supply that information to our administrators or other agencies or whatever. They want to know that on any given school year. But Atlanta Public Schools wants to count my few students as part of their overall numbers for free and reduced as well. And so that process happens through Atlanta Public Schools, partially and partially with the state. But other than that, I don't have any implementation of our program with City of Atlanta. The bulk of it comes dealing with the state. This happens through the Department of Education, the Georgia Department of Education, all right? And then they have a nutrition division that is also subdivided then into a lot of different groups. Some of them are just basically the financial side of things. Some of them are, there's a food safety specialist. There's all kinds of different jobs within that role, but I have a good bit of contact with them. Pretty much anything that deals with regulation around school breakfast and school lunch, for me, as a nutrition director, on the school level, happens directly with the state. So this is all tied into the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, which at this point I imagine you've heard of and are somewhat familiar with. This is legislation that was passed in 2010 that completely revised all of the targets for what a school lunch should have in it. And it was passed in 2010 and then phased in over a series of years, with some of those requirements becoming more strict each and every year. The first year that I worked at the school, this is again 2014 and 15, that was the first year that everything was supposed to be in place. Like the sodium targets were more strict. Some of the whole foods or the whole grain requirements about grain foods were in place, and I can get into that a little bit more. But basically, I've never known it any other way. All right, so I don't really know what the lunches were like that much before, or not anymore. You probably have a better idea, some of you, than I do, since you were in school prior to 2012 or 2014. I was not. I have school-age kids, but my daughter is in 2nd grade will be going to 3rd grade at my school. She started at the school the same time I did. So again, I started under the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act requirements, and they're all I've ever known. So while I find them to be fairly strict and fairly tough to meet sometimes, I think also overall I think that it's a really good target. And from my understanding, it's boosted especially vegetable and fruit, certainly servings, and I think overall consumption. But basically what the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act was doing was setting targets for a couple different things. A school meal has to have only a set number of calories. You can't serve, there's a floor and a ceiling on the amount of calories that can be in any given meal. There's a set amount of sodium that can be in any given meal. Only up to 10% of the calories can be from saturated fat, but no more, so you can't have things that are very, very rich. And then there's a lot of different food groups that you have to serve a minimum serving in each of them. There has to be a meat or meat alternate, which is a protein. There has to be a grain item. The grain item has to be whole grain rich, which means that at least half of it has to be whole grain of some sort. Like the biscuits in the slide there are ones that we make at the school. It's half white flour and half whole wheat in the recipe that we wrote. And let's see, then in vegetables, there has to be at least there has to be at least 3/4 of a cup of vegetables served every single meal. But it's more than that's. You'd have to serve more than that over the course of the whole week to meet your minimums. You have to serve some red-orange vegetables, some dark green vegetables, some starchy vegetables, some other vegetables they call it, and some beans and legumes. And you have to hit all of these different food groups over the course of a week. So you have to have a balanced menu over the course of the week's offerings, and you have to serve at least half a cup of fruit every single day. Some of that can be juice, but no more than half of it can be juice. You have to serve milk at every single meal, unless the student has a specific dietary restriction that's specified by a doctor, not just saying, I don't like milk. You have to have a variety of milk. You can't just have one kind of milk. You have to have at least 2 choices. There are certain limits on how much milk that can be in the milk, etc. So it's both fairly detailed, but it's also loose in that you can serve anything that you want to on Tuesday, as long as you're meeting these requirements over the course of, in any given meal and over the course of the week. There's nothing that's off limits with the exception of trans fats. All right, trans fats are less and less in our food, so it's not really a concern for me, and I can't imagine it's much of a concern for too many school food authorities. But I mean, you could serve donuts, you could serve sweets, you can serve junk food. The problem is that you've got these limits on how much calories and sodium and saturated fat can be in there, so that automatically means that just some things just aren't feasible. I have students who are asking me constantly, why don't we ever have dessert? Why can't we have this? Why can't we have that? That's almost always the case. If I were to serve even a very small cookie or something like that with a meal, that would suck up so much of my calories and probably sodium and definitely saturated fat that I would be unable to serve very much else on the tray. Probably wouldn't be able to get enough on there, or it would just be like a big pile of raw cabbage and then one little cookie, and who wants that? But that's how the Hungry Kids Act works, is that it's got basic guidelines that are more stringent than before. It's got an emphasis on whole grain foods and just increased requirements in terms of serving sizes on a lot of things. The way that I meet that is, I take those into consideration as I'm writing our menu every single month and for each day that we do. I don't have to show that to the state, but once every 5 years. It actually was changed to 3 years under the Healthy Hungry Kids Act, but then they, at least on the Georgia level, it may this may be nationwide, I don't honestly know, they've rolled it back to every 5 years because they didn't have the staff to meet the deadlines of inspecting every school system every 3 years. But when they do inspect you, somebody comes to the school and they want to see, they come to the school for a few days to see that you're serving things that meet all of the different regulatory requirements. Like if you say you're serving a half cup of green peas on a given tray, that you're using an implement that actually is a half cup. They're very, very detail oriented in this process. They also try and make sure that you're not violating other regulatory issues like equal opportunity, that you're not privileging one ethnic or socioeconomic group over another, or the boys over the girls or vice versa, that everything you're doing is on the up and up. You also have to supply a full week's worth of menus and detail every single thing that you're doing down to the last carton of milk. So we start a Tuesday with 657 chocolate milks and 193 whites. We finish the lunch service with exactly this many cartons of milk, and they want to see where every single one went. So it's very, very detailed work. I have not had to go through that whole process, but again, I mentioned that the caterer that was working at my school before I started did a poor job, and so I spent much of the first year and a half of my schoolwork, in addition to just doing everything else, trying to prove that what we were doing was was compliant with all the applicable regulations. That was difficult because we're cooking from scratch. I haven't worked in another school system, but from my understanding, we're doing a lot more fresh food and from scratch food than is normal. So like if a school is normally serving like a pizza or something like that, oftentimes that pizza is coming frozen and pre-made, and the manufacturer has taken the time to show that this is whole grain rich and it credits as 1 ounce of meat alternate, et cetera, et cetera. I have to do that from scratch for every recipe that we're writing because we're starting with complete basic building block ingredients. So it's a good bit of work on our side, but I only have to do most of that work every 5 years with the state. There's periodic training each and every summer. I have to go to a couple days of training for to make sure that I'm up to date on any kind of new regulation that's come through. when you first start the job, there's a fairly intense series of similar meetings that you have to go to. With the state, this is also how our federal reimbursement is handled. So on a monthly basis, we have to file a claim with the state that shows how many meals we served, how many of them were free, how many were reduced, and a lot of other financial aspects of our program. And then the state Department of Education finances unit in nutrition reviews all of that stuff and then issues us federal reimbursement money. We get more money for a free lunch than we do for a reduced lunch. We get more money back from the government for a reduced lunch than we do for a full pay lunch. But we do get reimbursed even for those full pay lunches. There's also something called 6 cent certification, which is mentioned in one of the pieces of evidence in the 1AC. This is part of the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, basically to incentivize cafeterias to move to the new requirements. If you have proven that you have done that and you're meeting all of the aspects of the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, the federal government pays an extra 6 cents for every school meal, which doesn't sound like all that much, but is a lot when you consider that many students are getting lunch every single day, and in a large school system, you can talk about hundreds of thousands of students on any given day eating meals. It's an incentive, but by the same token, it's required. Like, you have to meet the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. There's no not doing it. And in case of my school, when we were doing that administrative review that the old caterer did that didn't do a good job, I'm doing all the corrective action on that. At some point, basically showing our work was the issue, and so the way that we were recording what we were serving was not sufficient as far as the state was concerned. We had to keep redoing the same week of menus and taking new data and submitting that to the state. At some point it became too much, and they cut off our reimbursement for about 2 months, held it up. And so when we came back, we were able to get reimbursed for those meals, plus the additional 6 cents once we'd shown that we were compliant. But that's what 6 cent certification is. All of that happens on the state level for us on a monthly basis. The state Department of Education also handles administration of other federal funds. Most and probably all public schools in the country have some funds allocated to them as far as purchasing ingredients goes. And there's 2 ways that you can purchase it. You can purchase straight from the USDA. And there's a lot of foods that are USDA foods. These are things like frozen meats, fresh and canned vegetables, almost anything that you can think of. USDA foods often has it, like canned sliced pears or whatever. The other way that you can spend your federal dollars in terms of purchasing is a program called the Fresh Fruit and Vegetables Program, or FAVORS. This is how I do it, and this is administered by the Department of Defense. I think also some of your 1AC mentions that the National School Lunch Program was started by the Department of Defense coming out of World War II, and this is a legacy of that. My school, not a big school, again, about 650 students total, but each and every school year I have just under $14,000 to spend on fresh fruits and vegetables. I have to order those a week out, but I order them from a Department of Defense website, and it comes to me from a local distributor. But it's all fresh produce, so I'm buying, like whole apples, whole oranges, romaine lettuce, things like that. Kind of staples as well, but that's how we choose to do it. That allows us to focus more of our protein buying on sustainable and local sources. That stuff isn't really available on the USDA side of things. But in any case, this is federal money that's coming to us. This isn't a reimbursement issue for meals served. This is just money that we get to spend on food for our school, but it's administered, at least distributed, and the nuts and bolts logistics of it is handled on the state level by the Department of Education. I do have other contact with them for other random things, but it's not necessarily related to, I don't think, anything that you're talking about. Like, for instance, the state has a farm-to-school program. It's tied in with Georgia Organics, which is an advocacy program that's fairly well established in Georgia. And I've worked with Georgia Organics before when I was in restaurant life, and then have worked with them now also in school life as well. And that's been in collaboration with the state. like also at my school, we hosted a luncheon for the Governor's Commission on Childhood Obesity. Little things like this. This is really just more about my program and less about, your average run-of-the-mill school and how they interact with the state. A couple other things that I noticed just looking through the 1AC and that may be helpful to you in understanding some of the topic. Part of the plan is talking about competitive foods. And competitive foods are foods that are sold at the school that are not coming out of the nutrition department. So a lot of times these are fundraisers, but not exclusively. So a group on campus might be selling pizza as a fundraiser for cheerleading trip to such and such place. That's a competitive food. There are regulations about competitive foods. Obviously, the government wants kids to be eating school lunch and not to be buying these other pizzas, but they recognize that a lot of schools use these opportunities to fund various programs in their school. I don't have this issue at my school. We don't have any competitive foods happening, so I'm not super duper versed on it. If I remember correctly, a school can have up to 30 different competitive food events over the course of a school year, and each event can be a couple days long. So you could effectively have some sort of competitive food happening versus what's being served in the cafeteria for much of the school. I wish I could remember the specifics, and I just don't. This is something that was mentioned to me in a conference in Macon 2 years ago that I half paid attention to because it's just not applicable at my school. But that's what competitive foods are, and it really is an issue at some schools. For breakfast participation or lunch participation or both. And while there are regulations in place, they're pretty loose, and schools can do a lot in terms of undercutting their own nutrition departments. I also wanted to mention that there are USDA grant monies for farm to school already in place. This is partially what it seems to me like your plan is doing is increasing money possibly for these kinds of farm to school sorts of grants. And we applied for one for this coming school year. We didn't get it, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we were going to hopefully do with it, which would give you some idea about what the plan would actually be doing in a school setting. Again, ours is a little bit different. I don't necessarily know that if just a random school district were to get a farm to school grant that this is the way that they would spend their money, but for us, we were hoping the limit as it currently stands for these farm to school grants is $100,000. We applied for the full amount. Again, we didn't get it. We just found out at the beginning of the month that we didn't get it for this school year, but supposedly our application was a really strong one. They gave us a phone call to my executive director and heavily hinted that we should make sure that we apply again next year. So fingers crossed that'll be something that happens for us. But we applied for $100,000. It would be distributed over two school years. So it would have started, in August when we returned to school. Most of that, or a large chunk of that money, was going to be for just the labor. Doing things the way that we do it, where we're cooking as much as possible from scratch, takes a lot of time. I mentioned that my staff is 6 people, including myself. That's full-time employees at our school. That's high. That's very high for the number of students that we're serving. But it means that we're able to have 3 people on the line for each meal service. One person is handling the transactions as kids are coming through, making sure that we're charging the right students, but also making sure that their meals are in compliance with the meal plan. And 2 of us are there to serve. But it's a very, very busy day for us. If we're serving lunch for 3 hours in the middle of the day, or 2 hours in the middle of the day if it's the middle school, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that we're cooking for the next couple days at the same time during that day's work. If I'm making focaccia bread, for instance, it's got to be started. If we're serving it on Wednesday, I start Monday afternoon with that process, make part of the dough on Monday afternoon, I mix the dough on Tuesday, I'm letting it rise while we're serving lunch, and then I'm jumping back into the cafeteria to shape that dough. It gets put onto a rack and retarded into the refrigerator overnight. That's just one component on a tray that's probably going to have 4, 5, 6 different freshly made components each and every day. That's a lot of work. This is true in restaurants as well. Restaurants are notoriously difficult business to be in. The margins are fairly low, and the labor costs are always high. And anytime you're cutting your labor costs in general. It's coming at the expense of quality. That's labor that labor is happening somewhere, but it's probably happening, not in your establishment. That food is getting made somewhere else. It's getting chopped somewhere else, or it's that piece of pizza is getting put together and then frozen and shipped to you, and you're spending your money there rather than on your labor dollars. I don't know. The restaurants that I worked in were all scratch kitchens. We took pride in making our own stocks and in butchering our own fish and all of these things, and that's an approach that I've kind of tried to continue going into the school. It's not 100%. I'm relying a lot more on things that are pre-cut than I did before, but by and large, we're still doing a lot of work ourselves. Making our own bread, as I mentioned. I've had a whole goat before, that we had to butcher down. So this isn't an everyday thing. I'm not butchering whole goats every single day at school, but it is something that does happen, some of that work. And so to make sure that we're able to do that, it takes a lot of staff. Also, the teaching that I'm doing is for me the most rewarding part of my job, and it's something that I'm looking to expand and have a greater part of my life, but that does take me out of the kitchen. And so if we were to have gotten this grant, it would have been probably about a half a full-time person to a full-time person just working in the kitchen. That would allow me to be in more of an educational role some of my time. The other staff person would have been a farm-to-school educator. We have gardens at both of our schools. There's a small picture of our middle school garden, which is the more substantial one. Our elementary school does have gardens as well, but our biggest issue is who's going to work that garden. And that happens on a weekly basis just because it's nobody's full-time job. We've got a lot of parent involvement in my school, but these people have their own lives and own jobs, and so you can only get people to volunteer there so much. We try and have some student involvement in the gardens, but that's not as big of a part in our school as we would like for it to be. And then also, like during the summertime, I'm not at school today, and no one else is at school today either, but this is when food is growing, which is a challenge for any farm-to-school program, to make sure that there's somebody there to maintain a garden during the summertime months so that it's not just all weeds when you come back to school. So that is what most of our money would have gone to more hands in the kitchen, and then also somebody involved both in the garden, working in the garden, that's growing food for our school, but then also being someone who's in a lot of classroom and doing a lot of the teaching that would happen in that garden. Some of the money was going to go towards facilities. Part of the bid was I mentioned this course that I teach at the middle school. We did one on tacos before. We had a couple of ambitious courses that we were planning on doing as part of this grant that would require us to buy a new freezer and a new vacuum packaging machine. One of the courses was going to be a whole hog. We would buy a whole hog from a local farm and then see the process through from butchering the animal from whole all the way down to using all of that meat in various different meals over the course of the school year. That would require us to freeze a lot of that, and so part of that money was going to be to buy a new freezer to put that in, for instance. So mostly labor, some facilities, and then we also had a target of increasing our local purchasing by 15%. As is, we do buy a lot of stuff local already whenever we can, and whenever it meets our needs in terms of the menu. But just some of that money was just going to go straight into our operating budget with the goal of purchasing more local foods, especially produce from the Atlanta market. A lot of what we're buying locally, if it's truly, truly local, like grown in the metro Atlanta area and grown naturally or organically, is substantially more expensive than some of the conventional produce that we could buy. So to help subsidize that effort, that was part of what our grant was hoping to do. There are a couple other little things involved in it too. I have these, our school, the school's old. All right, so my school has been there 15 years, but the physical buildings that we're in are like almost 100 years old. The cafeteria, which you can see some of the kitchen, this is the elementary school, but the other one where there's more student work, it's all happening in our middle school cafeteria, which was built in 1949, and that's the newest structure in my school. That's old. So there's been a lot of work trying to, do the best that we can with this really old building, with really crummy plumbing, and in any kind of food service kitchen, you need to have a really great ventilation system, hood that's above the stove to suck up particulate matter and make sure that the air quality is good. The one that we have is a dinosaur. It's super duper loud and old, and I've got a lot of complaints about the facility, but I'll stop with them. But part of being in the super old building is we've got these really super creepy boiler rooms downstairs that were once used to heat the school, but haven't been used in decades. And they're truly, truly creepy down in the basement. And so I was hoping to create a mushroom farm down there and have students be involved in the work of planning and making a farm to grow oyster mushrooms that we would use in our school lunches and possibly even sell to the local community if our production got high enough. So fingers crossed we still get this grant at some point down the road. There could be a lot of really good things that could happen for us. My hope with my program is not tied into that grant money, but I do hope that with this program that in addition to just doing interesting work and feeding my school's student and staff food that they're interested in, but I hope that some of what we're doing is interesting and hopefully portable to other school systems, both in terms of relying much more on real food made fresh on site and supporting local producers, and then hopefully also some of the teaching components as well. I would like at some point for this to spread beyond just my small school, and that farm to school grant, while not essential to that mission, would be definitely a step in that direction. So we hope that we get it. But that's when I read the 1AC and I see the plan, that's where I think of. I think immediately of the grant that we didn't get that we maybe could have gotten. So anyway, that's my work. I was going to open it up for Q&A if you've got any questions specifically just about my work in general, or my work specifically, or more in general about how the school lunch program works. I'll do my best to answer those. So
are these grants coming from the states or the federal government?
the grant money comes from the federal government, but the state is the one who administers that money. And so that's also the same is true with the reimbursement. The reimbursement money all comes from the federal government. None of it comes from the state, but it all gets funneled through the state government. They're the ones who administer those funds. But yeah, I always have to apply for these kinds of things to the state level. Then they make a determination. Another just quick thing is that it's often difficult. One of the reasons, I think probably the main reason that we didn't get that grant is that a lot of times grant funding is tied in with free and reduced participation, which makes sense to me completely. They want to aid the schools that need it most. Generally speaking, the schools with the lowest free and or the highest free and reduced participation are also the worst off in a lot of ways. And I'm lucky to be at a school that has a fair amount of money. I've got a really active parent group in my school. Doesn't mean that we're not in this super old building and couldn't be doing really, really interesting work with that $100,000 grant that we didn't get. But it also means we're at a steep disadvantage whenever we're applying for any of those things. And there's lots and lots of grants that we don't even bother to apply for because they're like, the limits that they're like, you must have this X number of free and reduced participation to be eligible. This is one that we were eligible for, but unlikely to get from the very beginning. But yes, it is federal money administered on the state level.
What happens if you don't meet weekly requirements?
Can you say it again?
What happens if you don't meet your weekly requirements?
Yeah, good question. So this is about the nutrition requirements on any given level or on any given week. Most weeks, nothing happens. Again, I have to report this stuff to the state 1 week every 5 years. They ask that you do a representative menu, and we do. It's not like we have a separate menu that's just this is the state menu and then this is our other menu. But it's really by and large up to individual school systems to make sure that they're being compliant on any given weekly basis. There's no protocol to determine that stuff on an every single week basis. It's just it would be too much work. So that's the way the system works right now, is that they ask you to show them a week once every 5 years that's representative of the work you're doing. Yeah.
You mentioned something briefly about something where they monitor that to make sure that you're not discriminating against minorities or certain students of socioeconomic levels.
Yep.
Who administers that?
Well, there's just a lot of it is self-administered. I mean, we're subject to equal employment legislation, like pretty much all federal because we're receiving federal money, we're subject to equal employment and equal opportunity regulation. So there's a lot of little ways that plays out. Each and every thing, every menu, every communication that I have with a parent, any of that stuff must come with a disclaimer that we're equal opportunity, and then also provide a way if somebody feels that they've been discriminated against, gives them an avenue to air that claim, to call the Equal Employment Agency, handle it on that level. We receive training, like when I go to these conferences with the State Department of Education, they train us on what would be an appropriate or inappropriate way to interact with students on the line, things that you can say, things that you can't say, and then anybody who's working in the school is required to undergo some of that same training. So like every school year we watch a video prepared by the state that shows that kind of stuff. So mostly it's just self-done, but you have to you have to submit every single year a couple things. You have to submit evidence that everybody who works there has been trained on equal opportunity rules, and you have to have those disclaimers. So a lot of it seems very, very basic, but that's the main thing that happens, is you have to kind of make sure that you're doing that in your own practice, that you're always advertising an avenue for somebody to file a claim if they need to.
You said you get $12,000 to spend approximately. Is that federal reimbursement money or money given to you guys from the school?
It is not federal reimbursement money, but it is federal money. So the federal reimbursement money is based on how many meals we serve, and how many of them are free, reduced price, or full pay, because we get different levels of reimbursement based on this. And that is based on reporting that I do on a monthly level, or a monthly periodic basis with the state. Separately, there are funds that schools get to spend on the food that they serve. And for me, it's a relatively small number. It's about $13,000 a year. And I spend it all on the fresh fruit and vegetables program, which is part of the Department of Defense. I could choose to spend it on the USDA program, Department of Agriculture, which is not administered by the Department of Defense, but is just basically, like they're looking to make sure that, I think some of the evidence that is in the one you see talks about having, a market for American produce, and that's basically what it is. And so they'll take commodities, various commodities, and you can buy that stuff. I could spend all that money on some of these other foods. I don't even have to store it in my kitchen. I can warehouse it on one of the state storage facilities, and then just say, this week send me this much stuff. But that is completely independent of, that funding is independent of the reimbursement money. But both are federal money.
Do you think that big multinational companies should be allowed to operate the kitchens in schools?
Do I think that? I think that there's pros and cons. You know what I mean? Like, we're doing things on a really micro level, really, really hands-on, obviously. I'm in there with students, as much as possible and trying to get students involved. I know that stuff just wouldn't happen if it was a multinational thing. Even when you're talking about a larger corporation like Sodexo handling APS's stuff, I have concerns about the overall quality of the experience, quality of the food. But I also recognize that things the way that we do them at my school are not 100% portable. If, as I mentioned, that these visions I have of some aspect of my work going on and influencing a larger food movement or being incorporated on some other level, I recognize it's not going to be every single thing that we're doing. Some of what we're doing is just not economically feasible. So I think it's kind of an inevitability that large corporations would be handling a large part of this work. Do I think it's always great? I think it depends. You know what I mean? You're going to need something like that to implement something really, really large like this. But I also recognize that, I think that the kind of work that I get to do just wouldn't be part of it. And I think there's real value in what we're doing. So, I don't know, kind of a mixed answer. Yes and no.
So, it's easier for students with more disadvantaged kids to get grants over advantaged schools?
Yes. They make it generally easier for schools with higher free and reduced numbers to receive grant money. There's a lot of, depending on what the grant is, there's a lot of other things like they have periodic equipment grants, where you can apply, I don't remember what the limits are, $5,000, $10,000 for some equipment improvement to your school. And every time that email comes into my inbox, I'm like, oh, that'd be wonderful. I've got a lot of ideas about ways that we could spend money and upgrade our equipment and facilities, but generally those are going towards schools that have a higher free and reduced participation than we have. We have aims to increase our free and reduced participation. By the way, the part of Atlanta we're in is the home values in Grant Park and Ormwood Park have been steadily increasing, which is why we have smaller free and reduced numbers. Each school year it's slightly less and less. And noticeably so. Like, again, I just finished my third school year. We had about 15% free and reduced participation. My first school year was something like 19%. That's, not a huge difference, but it's only 2 years apart, and it's trending towards very, very, very little. My school's hoping to increase our diversity. That is a big part of the school's charter and mission, is to be a diverse school that helps everybody in the neighborhood and does so without distinction. There's a neighborhood called Summerhill that's adjacent to us that is a lower socioeconomic status, and so we're hoping to incorporate more of those students in our school, but it's going to be a while before it happens. So the end result is that I probably won't be seeing a lot of grant money in the short term at my school. Hopefully at some point down the road. But
one of the big criticisms of charter schools in general is that a lot of students find it very hard to get in with family and friends and younger siblings being accepted. Do you find yourself on a day-to-day basis seeing a lot of the same students coming through the cafeteria, i.e. family-wise, or do you see a lot of new faces every year?
Excellent question. Yes, very much so. We see more or less the same students coming through. Although there's a big swing. I mean, if we have a really popular menu, we see a lot more students that we see only on a periodic basis. There are some kids who are eating lunch with us every single day. But yeah, that's the way that our charter school works. To gain entry into our school, there's a lottery. Almost everybody comes in at kindergarten, and if you already have a sibling at the school, you're given priority, and you're basically just automatically in. And then if you live within one of these three, within the boundaries that they define for one of these three neighborhoods, Ormwood Park, Grant Park, and now Summerhill, you've got the highest level of priority for this lottery. My school is 650 students, roughly. Kindergarten, they actually just shrunk the number of kindergartners coming in. One of our goals is to have always a fairly small class size and good student-teacher ratio. And so we're taking 4 fewer kindergartners each and every school year. Despite trying to open it up, a lot of those spaces are taken by siblings, and so you mentioned that people are frustrated by being able to get in because there's not a lot of spots and siblings take them, and so yes, that happens. Despite our efforts and our hope to increase our free and reduced participation by incorporating this less socioeconomically advantaged neighborhood, it's going to be a long road before that happens because those students are just going to trickle in. There's 68 kindergarten spots. Oftentimes, as many as half of those are taken by siblings, depending on how fertile the parents are or whatever in that given year. And that's not a lot of kids. You know what I mean? That's just like 30 kids, 30 spots opening, and the school's well established, 15 years old. A lot of people want to be at the school. It's got a pretty good track record as far as academics go, and so. Yes, we by and large see the same, we get to know the families, and yes, I'm seeing the same kids a lot, and I understand that criticism. I can see it happening at our school. We're trying to make efforts to make our school more diverse, not less diverse, but we're still, at the whims of what our demographics are in our neighborhoods. Trying to balance our commitment to being a progressive, diverse, educational institution, but at the same token being a school that is very much a neighborhood school where you go to school with kids who you live around, who you know, and I live in this neighborhood, but I also work in this neighborhood, and that's true of a lot of the other faculty and staff at this school as well. And so it's a tough line to try to balance both of those. But yeah, I understand that criticism, and it's something that we see.
Do you think it'd be possible to increase the amount of fruit and vegetables super across the board if you make the regular student line now?
Do I think that we should increase the amount of fruits and vegetables, or I think it's fine?
Yeah.
Is that the question? It's a good question. I mean, again, I didn't deal with nutrition requirements before the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. I came in on the first year that everything was in place. this is all I know. I think that it's overall a good system. I think that there are studies showing that people are students are being served much more fruits and vegetables than they were before, and it's a good bit. We serve about at least a cup of fresh fruits and vegetables every single. Well, we serve at least a cup and a half of fresh fruits and vegetables every day. We try and do a cup of vegetables and a half cup of fruit. Yeah, I think overall, actually, the amount should be increased. But I think that's, for me personally, it's less to do with a fault in the current requirements under the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, and just general. I think that's how we should be moving as an American society and as a world society. It's mainly a resource argument for me. I feel like raising animals for meat is really, really resource intensive, land intensive. It's expensive, a lot of fossil fuels or methane or both. And if we could rely on a more vegetable-centric diet, then we would be better served overall in the long run in a lot of ways. At our school, we serve at least 2 days a week that are completely vegetarian. And then we have vegetarian options available the other days. And we're always trying to make those aspects of our menus, more appealing, more interesting, and a greater part of what we do. I go back and forth every school year during the summertime when I'm like less doing the day-to-day work of the school and thinking more about how the next school year is going to go. I always have this maybe we'll go 100% vegetarian some year, and we may. That would help at least to offset some of the costs, not a lot of the costs, but some of the costs of running a higher labor situation. By and large, vegetables, while not inexpensive, are less expensive than meats, and so it would be something that could offset some of my costs, but the main thing would be from a more environmentally sound and politically progressive standpoint. So overall, yes, I think that we could increase the amount of vegetables and fruits served, but it's less of a critique of the current targets from my standpoint.
For the years that you've been working at that school, you've been serving the healthier foods and stuff like that, have you seen significant health benefits in the kids?
Excellent question. Have we seen health benefits in our students? I don't know. We haven't studied anything like that. I don't have a lot of hard data or anything on those numbers. I do know that our participation is way up from before I was there. That first year that I was at the school, we improved our participation by over 30%. From where it was before when the caterer was doing a substandard job at the school. I don't attribute that entirely to the new requirements and healthy options. I think that's part of it, but I think that there was a lot of goodwill towards what I was trying to or am doing at the school, and a lot of parents were really excited about the idea of bringing in a farm to school program and making more sustainable choices for the school meals and that sort of thing. And I also have made a real push to get to know everybody that I'm there with. I try and learn as many students' names as possible, little things like that. So that's part of it too. I think it's just, there was excitement over us starting a program at the school, but also too, I can't deny that it was within the new guidelines. And so we did have an increase in participation. Whether there's a health increase as well, it's too soon to tell, I think, and I'm also looking at such a small sample size that I don't know if I would have any kind of indication of that one way or the other. But
how much fresh fruit do you use as opposed to canned fruit and vegetables, and do you think it's better to use fresh fruit and vegetables?
I absolutely think it's better to use fresh fruits and vegetables. We don't use any canned fruits. The only canned vegetables that we buy are canned tomatoes, because we only have fresh tomatoes in season during the school for 1 or 2 months of the school year. And then I buy canned pickled jalapenos for Nacho Day as a garnish. Other than that, everything is fresh, very little frozen, but almost all fresh. Yeah, I think there's a great benefit to it for a lot of different reasons. Generally, the taste is superior for the most part, especially if you know what you're doing with it. I think that some of the nutrition is better, although it's not like canned vegetables are bad for you, but generally they have a higher sodium content, and they're not as pleasurable to eat. And also, buying canned produce doesn't support anything as far as the local food movement goes. That was always something that I cared about a lot working in restaurants, getting to know your farmer, knowing where the food is coming from, being more connected with what you're eating and not less connected with what you're eating. And so fresh fruits and vegetables definitely feed into all of that. We're trying to grow some produce at our school, and that's the way we want to be going, to the point where not only is it fresh, but it's fresh from, like, let's take a short walk, a 5-minute walk, and we can go to the farm down the street that this came from, or even better, it came from our own backyard. I think that that's going to make, for people who, not just students and kids, but just generally as a society,